the mass killings and destruction of villages in its western region of Darfur. Human Rights Watch saw it differently. The director of its international justice program, Richard Dicker, said, "As killing and rape continue in Darfur, the United States now proposes further delay at the Security Council. The Bush administration's rearguard campaign to avert an ICC referral is putting innocent civilians at risk in Darfur." Washington's isolation extends to other areas, too. The United States and Israel alone opposed a UN treaty to protect and promote cultural diversity, debated by UNESCO. The organization had been severely weakened by the Reagan administration and the media 20 years earlier, when it sought to allow some Third World participation in international communication systems. The fraudulent grounds for the assault on UNESCO were that these efforts to broaden participation, thereby breaking the virtual Western monopoly, were an attempt to control the media and undermine freedom of the press. The United States also stands almost alone in opposing international supervision of the Internet, insisting that governance must be solely in the hands of the United States. The United States has fallen off the map in other respects as well. One well-known example is the dramatic increase in incarceration during the past 25 years. The United States began the period with incarceration rates resembling Europe's, and has ended it with rates 5 to 10 times as high, targeting mainly blacks, and independent of crime rates, which remain mostly at European levels. The U.S. prison population is the highest in the world, far higher than China's or Russia's. It increased again in 2004, particularly among women. Over half of those in federal prisons are there for drug-related crimes. Also familiar is the fact that the United States is virtually alone in the industrial world in granting the state the power to kill prisoners, oddly called a conservative position, in fact, a radical statist one. Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch report that the United States is alone in the world in locking up juveniles without possibility of parole. They counted 2,225 such juveniles in the United States, and a dozen in the rest of the world combined, restricted to South Africa, Israel, and Tanzania. Some U.S. states permit such sentencing for children as young as 10. The youngest currently serving is 13. In many cases, the charge was presence at the scene of a murder during a robbery. The number of children sentenced to permanent life imprisonment has risen sharply over the past 25 years, at an even faster rate than for adult murderers. Such practices are in violation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, ratified by every member state except the United States and Somalia, which has no functioning government. Popular attitudes toward social programs, stable for a long time, strongly suggest that the public supports the socioeconomic provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which affirm that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. This is the wording of Article 25, which has the same status as all other sections of the UD, as recognized once again by the September 2005 UN World Summit, with the United States formally agreeing. The summit reaffirmed that all human rights are universal, indivisible, interrelated, interdependent, and mutually reinforcing, and that all human rights must be treated in a fair and equal manner, on the same footing and with the same emphasis. If so, then the public once again firmly opposes the moral values of the Bush administration. which has effectively rejected these rights, even though formally accepting them, again in April 2005, as the sole dissenter in separate votes of 52-1 on UN resolutions on the right to food and the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. A month earlier, Undersecretary of State Paula Dobriansky presented the State Department's annual report on human rights around the world, affirming eloquently that promoting human rights is not just an element of our foreign policy. It is the bedrock of our policy and our foremost concern. Elsewhere, Dobriansky has explained the concept of human rights that it is her task to uphold. In her capacity as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs in the Reagan and Bush I administrations, Dobriansky sought to dispel what she called myths about human rights, the most salient being the myth that so-called economic and social rights constitute human rights. She denounced the efforts to obfuscate human rights discourse by introducing these spurious rights, which are entrenched in the UD, but which the administrations she represented firmly rejected. They are a letter to Santa Claus, UN Ambassador Jeane Kirkpatrick. Little more than an empty vessel into which vague hopes and inchoate expectations can be poured. Preposterous, and even a dangerous incitement. Ambassador Morris Abram, casting the sole vote against the UN right to development, a declaration that closely paraphrased Article 25 of the UD. It is instructive to look more closely into popular attitudes on the war in Iraq, against the background of the general opposition to the preemptive war doctrines of the bipartisan consensus. A study by the Program on International Policy Attitudes, PIPA, found that on the eve of the 2004 elections, 74% of the public felt that the United States should not have gone to war if Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction or was not providing support to al-Qaeda. 58% of Bush supporters, 92% of Kerry supporters, and 77% of the uncommitted. If Saddam only had the intent to develop WMDs, 60% opposed going to war, but nearly half favored the decision to go to war. The director of the study, Stephen Cull, points out that this is not a contradiction. Despite the official Kay and Dulfer reports undermining the claims about WMDs in Iraq, there was no serious effort to support the claims about ties to al-Qaeda. The decision to go to war was sustained by persisting beliefs among half of Americans that Iraq provided substantial support to al-Qaeda and had WMD, or at least a major WMD program, and thus they saw the invasion as defense against a severe and imminent threat. The powerful government media propaganda campaign launched in September 2002 and continuing into 2005 seems to have had a lasting effect in implanting irrational fears, not for the first time. PIPA studies have shown that by April 2003, a few weeks after the invasion, a large majority of Americans felt that the UN should take the lead in civil order and economic reconstruction in Iraq. By December 2003, 70% held that the UN should also take the lead to work with Iraqis to write a new constitution and build a new democratic government. The figures are particularly noteworthy in light of the fact that popular opinion on these matters is scarcely reported. Such views receive little articulate support. The issues do not appear on the electoral agenda, and Americans have remarkable misperceptions about the war, probably unique in the world. As already noted, these figures suggest a simple exit strategy if the administration had any interest in pursuing this course. Follow the will of the American public and transfer authority to the UN, assuming, as always, that Iraqis favor this option. In March 2004, Spanish voters were bitterly condemned for appeasing terror when they voted out